Now, if all of our apps were wrapped up and protected by Android to where they could never interact and exchange data, if they could never read each other's saved state ever, we'd have much less interesting applications on our devices. Almost all of the really interesting Android applications involve some type of interaction between that app and another app or set of services on the device, or with the data that they're storing underneath their apps. So for example, the Contacts app. A Contacts app that's on Android by default stores its data and persists it, and Android protects that saved state of your contacts. But at the same time, we want to be able to get access to the contact list sometimes from other apps. So Android does provide mechanisms to allow apps to share data outside of the protected sandboxes that Android provides for them. So apps can both share data outside of the processes that they're running in. So at runtime, they can share data that they've loaded and is running outside to other apps. And Android apps can also, if they want to, share data that they've persisted on the file system to other apps. Now, by default, Android tries to protect you. It tries to keep your app within its own little sandbox, with its own process, protecting the memory of that app, protecting the data it's storing on the disk. But it gives you the option to build richer apps that do talk outside of their sandbox. But it's in these interactions where we begin talking to other apps and services on the device, when we begin persisting data in ways that other apps can read and interact with, that we run the danger of writing an insecure app. So the two big areas that we have to be careful of are, one, at runtime when we begin interacting with and talking with other apps. And typically the way that you do this on Android is through, as you've seen, inter-process communication, or IPC. And IPC can take a number of forms, as we've seen. This can be the exchange of intents between applications and services. This can be binding and interacting with a service and invoking a service that's running in another app or process. So something like getting access to the GPS, that's not going to be running in your app's process. So all of these interactions through IPC, whenever we decide to have those interactions, we need to be cognizant that we're exposing our app to another app. We're opening up this sandbox that we live in by default, and we're allowing our app to interact with the memory of other apps and to interact with the memory of our app. So whenever we begin doing interactions through intents, through services, or through other mechanisms, we're beginning to open up our app at runtime and open up those memory protections. The other thing that we can do is we can save data to sort of communal areas on the disk. So we can do things like save data to the SD card. And in many cases, you want to save things to the SD card. So for example, if you have a custom camera app that you're writing, you probably want to store those pictures on the SD card so that the user can remove the SD card, put a new one in to store more pictures, and also so that other applications like the photo gallery application can read those photos. So there are certain places like the SD card when we store data that we are opening our app's persisted state up to other apps. You can also store data with different permissions. So we can change the default permissions when we store data, even though we're storing it in our app's own little private data storage area on the device, we can still open up that data and store it with things like read from any app, and we can change those permissions. So whenever we do those types of things, or we store data in a way that other apps can get access to it, we have to be aware of the possibility of another app coming and either reading that information in order to corrupt it, or to use that information to attack our app in some way, or to trick it in some way. The other area that Android can't protect us against is if we have a graphical user interface. So we have a GUI that is a part of our app. Now, GUIs are great. We can use a GUI to get information from the user that we need, like their username and password. But GUIs are also areas where other apps can try to attack our app, because a GUI is a way of inputting data into our app. So although we have a process that's protecting the memory around our app, any type of GUI is an area where we're allowing data to be placed into our process, either through fields like username and password that the user is going to provide data, or by going and adding buttons, which when they're clicked, they turn into events that are injected into the memory of our application and give another app the chance to attack us. Now, a GUI, another piece of malware, probably can't directly manipulate your GUI, but what it can do is it can trick the user into manipulating your GUI into a state that it wants. So it can trick the user and make it think that it's doing something other than it is. So it manipulates the user to convince them that it's logging into your banking app, when in reality it's providing a fake GUI to do something else. So the GUI is another area that we have to protect. We either have to protect it from taking data that's going into our memory and corrupting it in some way, or getting knowledge of that data in some way, such as a username and password, or protect it from taking a GUI that's supposed to be putting data into our process in our memory space where it's protected, and instead extracting that data and putting it into a piece of malware. So these are three really important areas that we have to understand what Android protects us against and what it doesn't protect us against, and what we as developers have to do to make sure that we write more secure apps. We want to make sure we protect our GUIs. We want to make sure we protect the things that we store in terms of state on the disk. And we want to make sure that we protect our interactions with other apps through inter-process communication or other mechanisms.